You might think pirates spent most of their time sword fighting and hunting treasure, but their biggest enemy wasn't other sailors or royal navies. It was something much simpler: finding clean water to drink. Let me tell you something funny about sailing. In the 1700s, ships could carry enough salted meat and hard tack to feed a crew for months, but water, that stuff turned into a disgusting soup of algae and bacteria faster than you could say yo ho ho. The average pirate needed at least a gallon of water every day just to stay alive in the scorching heat of the Caribbean. Do the math: for a crew of 50 pirates, that's 50 gallons daily. No wonder water was more valuable than gold sometimes. Here's where things get interesting and kind of gross. Some desperate pirates actually tried drinking sea water when they ran out of fresh water. Bad idea, really bad idea. Seawater has about 3.5% salt content, which is way more than our bodies can handle. Drinking it basically tells your kidneys, hey, time to work overtime. Your body uses more water trying to get rid of all that salt than the amount of water you drank in the first place. Some pirates learned this the hard way, and let's just say it wasn't pretty. I once read about a pirate ship that had been running low on water for days, and some crew members were so thirsty they started drinking sea water mixed with wine, thinking the alcohol would make it safe. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Most of them got violently sick, and it actually made their situation way worse. Now you'd think someone would have come up with a better solution, but remember, this was long before plastic containers or water purification systems. The best they could do was try to keep their water in the coolest part of the ship, usually in the hold below deck. But even then, the rolling of the ship, the heat, and the humidity meant that clean water was always a precious commodity. The water situation got so bad sometimes that pirates would completely change their planned routes just because they heard about a freshwater spring on some random island. Imagine being the most feared pirates in the Caribbean, but having to make a detour because you're dying for a drink of clean water. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation. Speaking of reputations, there's a lesser-known story about the infamous Blackbeard. Everyone knows him as this terrifying pirate who put smoking fuses in his beard to scare people, but what most don't know is that he was actually pretty clever about water management. He would specifically target ships that he knew were carrying fresh water supplies along with their cargo. Smart guy, right? When things got really desperate, pirates had to turn to their most reliable backup plant, the sky itself. And trust me, when those rain clouds appeared on the horizon, you'd never see a crew move faster to their positions. The moment a storm rolled in, the entire ship transformed into one giant water-catching machine. The deck became busier than a seafood market on discount day. Pirates actually had a whole system worked out for catching rain. The sails, those massive sheets of canvas that usually caught the wind, became giant funnels when tilted just right. During storms, you'd see crew members adjusting the sails at specific angles, creating what they called water channels. Sometimes they'd fight over who got to position which sail, because everyone knew the forward sails caught the cleanest water, less bird poop to deal with, if you know what I mean. The clever part was how they used every single surface on the ship, those wooden railing gutters that usually kept seawater from washing across the deck. During rainstorms, they became water highways, channeling precious freshwater straight into waiting containers. Some creative pirates even carved extra grooves into the deck planking to help guide more water toward their collection points. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Pun totally intended. Rain collection came with its own set of problems. First off, the initial rain that hit the ship was usually pretty dirty. Birds had been doing their business on those sails for weeks, and the salt from sea spray had built up everywhere. Smart pirates would let the first few minutes of rainfall wash everything clean before they started collecting, they called it. Letting the deck have its bath. Here's a funny detail most history books don't mention. During big storms you'd see pirates running around with their hats upside down trying to catch extra water. Some would even strip off their shirts and wring them out into containers. One account from a Spanish merchant ship describes watching a pirate crew looking like they were doing some bizarre rain dance when really they were just trying to maximize their water collection. But you couldn't always count on rain. Sometimes ships would go weeks without seeing a single cloud. That's when pirates got really creative with their water preservation techniques. They had strict rules about water usage, even stricter than the rules about fighting or sharing treasure. Breaking the water rules could get you in more trouble than stealing from the captain himself. There's this great story about a pirate ship called the Morning Star where the crew caught so much rain during one storm that they had enough water for 2 extra weeks at sea. They celebrated by having a rain feast where everyone got an extra ration of water, which might not sound like much of a party to us today, but back then it was better than finding a chest full of gold. The really skilled pirates could even predict when and where they might find rain by watching the clouds and seabirds. They'd adjust their entire route just to sail through areas where they thought they might catch a good storm. Makes you wonder if some of those fearsome pirates were really just expert meteorologists in disguise. But even with all these clever rain-catching tricks, there were still times when the sky stayed stubbornly clear. That's when pirates had to turn to their life-saving backup plan. When the rain barrels ran dry and then the skies stayed clear, pirates had to become expert water hunters on land. Forget treasure maps. The most valuable maps in a pirate's collection were the ones marking freshwater springs and rivers. These water maps were kept more secret than buried treasure locations, and for good reason. A good water source could mean the difference between life and death. The first trick every pirate learned was to look for green plants. Sounds obvious, right? But there's more to it than just finding the nearest palm tree. Pirates figured out that certain plants were better water indicators than others. Coconut palms might look tropical and pretty, but they can actually grow in pretty dry soil. The real water finders were plants like ferns and thick grass. They needed constant moisture to survive. Some clever pirates even learned to spot morning glory vines, which almost always meant fresh water was nearby. Here's where it gets interesting. Pirates became experts at digging what we now call seepage wells. About 50 foot inland from the beach, they dig holes in the sand. Slowly these holes would fill with filtered fresh water. The sand acted like a natural filter, keeping the salt water out while letting fresh groundwater seep in. Pretty smart for a bunch of guys who spent most of their time breaking the law. But my favorite water finding technique has to be what I call the bird trick. Pirates would watch for birds, especially in the early morning or late afternoon. Birds need to drink too, and they usually do it at the same time each day. If you saw a group of birds all flying in one direction, chances were good they were heading for water. One pirate captain wrote in his journal that he found his best water source by following a flock of parrots. Though he complained that they made so much noise, it was like they were mocking him the whole way there. Sometimes pirates got really desperate and had to raid coastal towns just for water. Talk about awkward. Imagine being the most feared pirates in the Caribbean, and instead of stealing golden jewels, you're running off with barrels of water. There's actually a funny story about a pirate crew that raided a Spanish settlement in 1718. They stole all the water barrels, but felt so bad about it that they left behind a small bag of gold coins as payment. I guess even pirates had their moments of guilt. The really skilled water hunters learned to read the land itself. They looked for V-shaped valleys, which often had streams running through them. In rocky areas, they searched for dark streaks on cliff faces which meant water was seeping out of the rock. Some pirates even claimed they could smell water from a distance, though that might have had more to do with the rum they were drinking than any actual water. Finding skills. Some pirate crews actually kidnapped local guides who knew where to find water, but this often backfired. Hilariously, one captured guide led a crew in circles for 3 days before they realized he was just messing with them. Another guide took them to a spring, all right, one that was home to a bunch of very unhappy crocodiles. After a few incidents like that most pirates decided it was better to make friends with locals rather than force them to help. One of the cleverest techniques I've heard about was the decollection trick. Pirates would dig slanted holes and line them with large leaves. In the morning, dew would collect on the leaves and run down into containers. It wasn't much, but when you're desperate for fresh water, every drop counts. But finding water was only half the battle. Once pirates had their precious fresh water, they needed somewhere to store it, and those wooden barrels used weren't exactly the best containers. The biggest challenge pirates faced wasn't actually getting water, it was keeping it drinkable in those massive wooden barrels. These weren't your backyard beer kegs. We're talking about huge hogshead barrels that could hold 63 gallons each. A decent-sized pirate ship would need about 30 of these monsters just to hold enough water for a month at sea. Do the math, that's nearly 2,000 gallons sloshing around in the hold. The real enemy wasn't the barrels, but what started growing inside them. After a few weeks at sea, the combination of heat, moisture, and wooden walls created the perfect breeding ground for all sorts of nasty stuff. Pirates called water that had gone bad live water because you could actually see tiny creatures swimming around in it. One pirate's journal from 1716 described it as drinking a mouthful of wiggling worms, with every sip appetizing, right? But pirates came up with some pretty clever tricks to fight the rot. One of their best innovations was charring the inside of barrels, basically turning them into giant water-holding charcoal filters. They'd burn the inside layer of wood until it turned black, creating a protective barrier. It's the same technique that's still used today to make whiskey barrels, though I doubt the pirates were thinking about aged bourbon when they came up with it. Pirates discovered that dropping silver coins into their water barrels helped keep the water fresh longer. They didn't know about bacteria back then, but they knew silver had some kind of magical purifying power. Modern science has proven they were actually onto something. Silver really does have natural antibacterial properties. Talk about striking gold with silver. The most meticulous pirates would seal their barrel seams with a mixture of tar and resin. Some crews even developed their own secret recipes for barrel sealant, mixing in everything from beeswax to coconut oil. There's a story about one pirate captain who was so protective of his barrel sealing formula that he would make his crew turn their backs while he applied it. When he was finally captured, the British Navy offered to reduce his sentence if he'd share his secret. He refused, probably taking history's best barrel sealing recipe to his grave. Temperature was another huge factor in water storage. Pirates figured out that keeping barrels in the coolest part of the ship helped slow down the rot. But here's the problem: the lowest deck of a ship, where it was coolest, was also where the ship moved the most. So you had to choose between slightly less rotten water or barrels that weren't constantly trying to break free and roll around the hold like bowling balls in an earthquake. One particularly enterprising crew tried wrapping their barrels in wet sailcloth, hoping the evaporation would keep them cool. Great idea in theory, but all they ended up with was moldy sailcloth and water that still went bad. Another crew tried painting their barrels white to reflect heat, only to discover that white paint in the 1700s contained lead that definitely made the water last longer. but for all the wrong reasons. The funniest attempts at water preservation came from superstitious pirates who thought bad water was caused by evil spirits. They perform elaborate blessing ceremonies over new barrels complete with chants and dances. One crew even hired a water witch to bless their barrels. Surprisingly, their water did stay fresh longer, probably because the witch was the barrels when no one was looking. But even with all these clever tricks, pirates still had to deal with water that went bad. When the barrel water started turning green and growing things, they needed a backup plan, and that's where they got really creative with their own DIY systems. Their DIY water filtration methods ranged from surprisingly clever to hilariously desperate. Ever tried to filter water through your hat? Well, pirates did, though. I wouldn't recommend drinking anything that's been through a pirate's hat. The basic pirate water filter was pretty simple. Take a piece of clean cloth, or what passed for clean on a pirate ship, stretch it over a container and pour the gunky water through it. This caught the big stuff like those tiny wiggling worms and bits of floating algae. One pirate wrote in his journal that the cloth would get so green after filtering that it looked like seaweed had made it with his best shirt. A few creative pirates even tried to copy what they'd seen on tropical islands where water naturally filtered through layers of sand and rock. They build these mini filtration systems using whatever they could find on board. Broken pottery, crushed seashells, even bits of coral they'd picked up from their last raid. One captain swore that filtering water through a layer of smashed pearl necklaces made it taste better. Pretty expensive water filter, if you ask me. Some pirates actually tried to desalinate sea water by boiling it and catching the steam. They'd hang wet cloths above boiling pots of seawater, wait for the cloth to get soaked with condensation, then wring it out into clean containers. Did it work? Kind of. Was it worth the effort? Well, considering it took about a gallon of drinking water's worth of wood to boil enough seawater to make a cup of fresh water, you do the math. The award for most desperate filtration attempt goes to a crew that tried to filter their water through tobacco leaves because they'd heard tobacco killed germs. Spoiler alert, it just made the water tastes like someone had emptied an ashtray into it. They might have had better luck smoking the water, though. Knowing pirates, someone probably tried that too. When citrus fruits were available, pirates would sometimes squeeze them into their filtered water. They weren't just trying to make pirate lemonade. The acidity actually helped kill some harmful bacteria, plus it helped prevent scurvy, which was like hitting two birds with one lime. Unfortunately, most pirates had no idea why this worked. They just knew that crews who drank lime water got sick less often than crews who didn't. The most successful filtering method turned out to be the simplest. Time. If you let bad water sit long enough in a clean container, the nasty stuff would eventually settle to the bottom. Pirates called this sleeping water because they'd let it take a nap before drinking. It's not the most scientific explanation, but hey, whatever works when you're in the middle of the ocean with nothing but questionable water to drink. Speaking of questionable water, some pirates took a completely different approach when their water went bad. Although this method is somewhat disgusting, it saved countless lives on sea. Most people think pirates drank rum because they loved getting drunk. Well, that's only half the story. They were actually trying to stay alive. Rum wasn't just a party drink, it was their version of a water purification tablet mixed with water to make grog. It helped kill bacteria and made even the nastiest water somewhat drinkable. The official recipe for grog went something like this: take 1 part rum, mix it with 4 parts water, add a splash of lime juice if you're feeling fancy, and congratulations, you've just made yourself a pirate's version of a water treatment plant. The alcohol content was just enough to kill off some of the nasty bacteria growing in there. Water supplies, while the lime helped prevent scurvy, talk about efficiency. Treating your water and getting your vitamin C all in one drink. But grog wasn't invented by pirates at all. It was actually created by British Admiral Edward Vernon in 1740. The sailors nicknamed him Old Grog because he wore a gros cloak, a kind of rough fabric, and that's how the drink got its name. Pirates just borrowed the idea like they did with most things, though I'm pretty sure they didn't fill out a patent application for their version. The math behind grog is actually pretty fascinating. A typical pirate ship with 50 crew members would go through about 70 gallons of rum per week just for making grog. That's more than a gallon per person. Of course, some of that rum mysteriously evaporated before it made it into the grog barrel pates called this phenomenon the angel share, though. These angels seem to have quite a drinking problem. Different pirate captains had their own special grog recipes. Some added sugar to make it taste better, others threw in spices like nutmeg or cinnamon. One particularly creative captain added mint leaves and called it a Caribbean cocktail, I guess. He was a few centuries ahead of the mojito trend. The really smart pirate captains use grog rations as a way to control their crew's water consumption. Each sailor got a specific amount of grog per day. Too much straight water would go bad, but grog could last longer. It was like having a drink ticket system at a bar, except instead of preventing drunk people from ordering more shots, it was preventing thirsty pirates from drinking all the ship's water supply in one go. There's this hilarious account from a captured merchant sailor who wrote about pirates arguing over grog rations. Apparently, one pirate tried to convince his captain that he needed extra grog because he was twice as thirsty as normal men. The captain's response: then you can be twice as thirsty with the same ratio as everyone else. Pirates might have been outlaws, but they still believed in equal rights when came to grog distribution. Not everyone was a fan of grog, though. Some pirates complained that it made the water taste even worse, which is really saying something considering how bad their water already was. Others argued that it just made them sleepy, which isn't ideal when you're trying to spot merchant ships. To Ra1 crew actually mutinied because their captain watered down the grog too much. Apparently, there's a fine line between water purification and pirate revolution. The most interesting thing about grog wasn't the drink itself, it was how it changed pirate culture. Having a daily grog ration became such a big part of pirate life that they actually scheduled their day around it. You didn't attack another ship until after grog time, and you definitely didn't start any serious arguments until everyone had their daily ration. Even with all these methods, rain catching, land hunting, barrel storage, grog mixing, and DIY filtering, pirates still struggled with keeping clean water on their ships. But that's what made them so resourceful. With nothing but wooden barrels, some cloth, a few silver coins, and plenty of rum, they managed to survive months at sea.